So, welcome to episode 3 of The Curse of Melanie's Grave, where I talk about my feature film Melanie's Grave, which is set for release this September. So, last time I talked about the cast and the characters that they played, but most films rely on the background artists who are just as important as the lead actors, because without them, your street scene, your pub scene, your theatre scene is going to look pretty sparse without them. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the extras today, or the background artists. But when you're an amateur filmmaker, having background artists is usually never really a consideration, and if they are, they're usually like your friends or other crew members, and this was certainly the case for me when I shot Melanie's Grave. Even though we shot in the street in a housing estate a few times, I had them like a minimal amount that I could get away with. So the two women here were crew members, and I reused one of them in another scene, and just like basically changed her costume. So this guy's actually me, even though I have a speaking role in the film, and I was also an extra, but I had my hood up to disguise like my identity. The shot is quite short as well. I even used my hand in another scene, doubling as a police detective. So these are cheats that you tend to use when you're shooting with no budget. So in the film I've got a number of police officers, but I actually only had 3 actors to play them. So the main officer here is played by Dennis Hewitt, who goes by the name of Dennis Bear. He was used here, and also he's seen playing another police officer in another scene, again with the female crew member that we saw earlier, and I had him with his back towards the camera with a different look, so it looked like it was 2 different officers. So the 2 officers at the rear of this shot were not seen as clearly because they have a more prominent scene, which is supposed to be several years earlier in a flashback, so it would have been a bit silly to see them both in both timelines very prominently. So the only other extra in the film was this lady you see in the background, who turns and looks back at the police. This is Janice, the mother of Lucy, who plays the younger version of Mel in the film. She was on set that day with Lucy, so I stuck her in the back of the shot just to make the street seem a little bit busier. And you don't even notice her, but subconsciously it makes the scene a little bit more realistic. So on most of my previous films in the past, I barely used background actors, mainly because of the locations where I was shooting the films, but also because I kind of scripted it that way as well. But there was one film I did where I actually hired a dozen or so extras from an agency, and again, I repeated them in various scenes to make the scenes look busier. So this film was an exception for me in terms of extras, but necessary, as the film was all about girl gangs. Personally, I was a background actor for 10 years and have worked on many TV shows, including Biker Grove, Wire in the Blood, Vera, Inspector George Gently, and many others, including documentaries, TV commercials, and short films. And I've got a few stories that I wanted to tell. So a lot of the time, the background artists, although they're essential for any film or TV programme, they aren't treated with very much respect by the crew on those particular productions. They're stuffed on a bus or in a room somewhere well out of the way, and at lunchtimes are always the last to be fed. And sometimes various options on the menu aren't available because the main cast and the crew have already taken that, and all that's left is what you've got to make do with, basically. Now, I understand why that happens. It's because the main actors and the crew have to get straight back to work after they've finished their lunch break, whereas the extras are kind of maybe sitting around and waiting to go on set. I remember being on a TV show and I was actually runner at the time and expected to work all day on a couple of dried and hardened sandwiches and a handful of crisps, and I had to go in search of them. They weren't brought to me, or I wasn't even told where they weren't offered. And when I went off during my lunch break, bear in mind, I was confronted by the first AD when I came back, and because I wasn't available during my lunch break to do something for him, he gave me attitude, and he was like, "This isn't working for me." I was like, "Well, it isn't working for me either, mate." I also remember on another film, we were bought a pizza to share amongst a dozen of us, and I ended up having one slice, and that was it for the entire day. So just a shout out to any filmmakers out there, even if you're making a no budget film, you must at least feed your cast and crew and pay their travel. That's just basic. So the best time I had on a production was on set of Vera, where I was selected to be a featured extra, and I spent all day with just the director and one actor working on this scene. The scene was me finding a body and running off to get help. I think the worst time I had in any production, well, there's actually, I think it's a tie actually. So I once did a car commercial one hot summer, and I spent 11 hours on a bus in a dusty car park, and I got used the last 5 minutes of the day, and we did 2 takes, and then I went home. So basically I got paid to sit on a bus all day, and I had nothing to do. There was no, like, this was back before you had smartphones and all of the kind of videos that you would watch on like TikTok and YouTube and all that kind of stuff. So I was sitting there bored out of my brains for the entire day. Obviously there was other extras there, but once you'd kind of exhausted your initial conversations, then you were just kind of sitting there bored out of your brains for the rest of the day. So the other incident was when a first AD bawled out a third AD for allowing me to walk through the back of a shot when they were filming. So we were filming an episode of Inspector George Gently, and I was dressed as a police officer, and I was the only background actor on set. And I was stuck in this shed in the middle of nowhere, like, to wait until they were ready for us. So we were filming on this isolated farm, and the crew were inside for hours and hours, and I didn't know where the hell they were. So I just went for a little walk to stretch my legs, because I've been sitting there for ages. And I couldn't see and I couldn't hear where the crew were until the first AD shouted out, "What's that extra doing walking through the back of the shot?" He was an absolute dick. And actually I thought about walking off set, but we were miles from anywhere, and I had no way of getting back to the base. And also I obviously had my police uniform on. What I really should have done is kicked up a fuss and demanded be taken back to the base so I could like leave, but obviously I wouldn't have gotten paid for that day. So that's it for this episode. Tune in next time for more stories about Melanie's grave, and I promise some juicy stuff is coming up. So keep watching. Don't forget to like, share, follow and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.